Welcome to the Rude Dog Show. This is Rudy Reyes. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been an absolute scorcher today, and I mean scorcher because of the aftermath that was left behind by Baker Mayfield, and the trilogy officially has been closed. Case closed, shut it down, no longer a cold case as to whether or not Baker Mayfield is going to start for the Cleveland Browns in 2022, 2023. Now, what's really interesting about Baker Mayfield, of course, we've heard a lot of the rumors whether or not Baker Mayfield is going to be the guy who's going to get shipped out in lieu of having Deshaun Watson, who in his own right is having some serious legal issues, and he should be. He should have all the issues that he could possibly handle, but it's not how you handle them. It's not the issues, it's how you handle them and how you contest with quite possibly being the answer to the Cleveland Browns. Unfortunately, it may not look like he'll be the answer this year, could look like that more towards 2023, 2024 campaign. The Browns decided today to send Baker Mayfield to Carolina for a fifth-round pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. A small cap hit. When I say small, maybe not small to you and I, but small to the organization from the standpoint of being $5 million, which would make Mayfield a free agent in 2023. Now, Cleveland currently has employed 4 quarterbacks. We know that Deshaun Watson is one of those guys. Jacoby Brissett, thank you, William Senso, for chiming in. I appreciate it so early on in the show. You're the man. Thank you for that. What happens is now you have Dobbs, who's a variable, he's a serviceable quarterback. There's no question about that. He did that while he was in Pittsburgh. But you know who Jacoby Brissett is, another serviceable quarterback. He had played the role in Indianapolis, and he's been around another team other than the Indianapolis Colts. What I like about Josh Dobbs, he's very cerebral. He takes coaching to a different level. He has a very high IQ, very smart guy. But again, one of those things where because he's so cerebral, he's more of a coach, a quarterback coach, or a quarterback, maybe not quite a whisperer, but certainly a coach in the National Football League from that standpoint. And whether or not he's going to see daylight, he could, depending on Jacoby Brissett's performance. Now that Baker Mayfield is no longer going to be there to be that guy under center for Cleveland. And of course, this is a laundry list of starting quarterbacks in the NFL. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But I certainly wanted to put my own 2 cents into this because it would stand to reason we know what Baker Mayfield is. He may not have been a leader in the locker room. Fans have not really kind of endeared him in the way that maybe he would have liked. Maybe the kind of guy where he was looking to get a lot more of the accolades from fans than he actually was getting. But this isn't a one-person sport. This is a team sport. So it takes one person to help be the catalyst to get them back to winning ways, winning methodologies, and what that actually looks like. Now, what's interesting about this is that he was the number 1 pick overall in 2018. I happened to be there at that NFL draft. Of course, I interviewed Sam Darnold. We'll talk about the NFC South shortly as well. But there was a lot of things that I didn't like from Baker Mayfield, and the fact that he wasn't there. Now, he didn't necessarily have to be there. It was an option for him to be there, but for him to actually be there and be interviewed by everybody in the green room, including myself, would have been fantastic for him being the number 1 overall pick. And not being the leader in the locker room, not a good sign for him, not a good sign for the Cleveland Browns moving forward. But let's look at this from a different perspective. You're the starting quarterback on any given NFL team. You deserve to have some type of camaraderie with your coworkers. Maybe that was lacking. Maybe that was missing within that locker room. And possibly his coworkers not giving him the type of maybe attention, maybe the type of, way to go, good job, Baker. Maybe there wasn't a ton of that. And a lot of the quarterbacks in the NFL, of course, those that are not for long, we know that the NFL is certainly means that, and no free lunch also is another euphemism associated with those letters. But alas, that's not the case when you look at Baker Mayfield and his tenure with the Browns. He's at par for 500 completions, identical in turnovers with 30 apiece. Now, I can't say that I'm really shocked by this, only because, well, these are the Browns first and foremost. They've had more, and I made a funny tweet out on Twitter discussing how even Phillip Rivers himself has more kids than the Browns had starting quarterbacks. Of course, we know that that's not accurate because we know Cleveland Browns are one of those teams that just continually finds ways to start new quarterbacks. And of course, with Baker Mayfield being the only quarterback outside of Bernie Kosar to lead the Cleveland Browns, lead them into better waters has been a century at least since Bernie Kosar was the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. And you can have that, with, Couch and just a laundry list of other guys. But what's really revealing about this is that during the revitalization of the Cleveland Browns franchise, it's just kind of wild to me when you think about the amount of quarterbacks, the kind of guys that went on to go somewhere else, and or maybe not go anywhere else at all. And I'm sure a lot of these guys in Cleveland will say, you know what, maybe I was a guy at one time. I'm no longer that guy anymore. And the Browns need to find, someone else that's going to do what I was, drafted to do. Tim Couch drafted high in the NFL draft, but they've had 31 different starting quarterbacks. And during those 22 years, they started multiple different quarterbacks, except for 2001, 19, and 2020. Why? Because Baker Mayfield drafted in 2018. And when I look at this guy being first, pick overall, he hasn't made it to any type of Pro Bowls. The numbers aren't exactly stellar. Don't really stand out to me. Nothing about what he has done stand out to me other than one thing and one thing only. He's a consummate professional. And when you look back at his season, he played with a torn labrum. He was able to take my team, the Steelers, out of any type of playoff contention. And with that, enabled him to, to be honest with you, to be that guy. But when you're 6-7 as a rookie, that doesn't exactly, again, scream off the page for other teams who are, at 500 or better, the opportunity to either draft a quarterback or not have ones that are available. And the saddest part about that is that when you look at Baker Mayfield at 1-31, in 2 seasons, 27 touchdown passes the year he was drafted, until it was passed by Justin Herbert, who I think is a much more supreme, and we're talking cerebral earlier about Josh Dobbs, is certainly a supreme cerebral quarterback in the way that he slings that pigskin. I don't know if it's really made out of pigskin, but that's what they call it, and that's what he's been doing out there for quite some time. The Chargers obviously loaded up in the AFC West, but in his own right, Justin Herbert, who also plays extremely prolific, is one of those guys you need to watch out for in 2022. Obviously, from a fantasy perspective, he's one of those guys that you really need to have on your roster as your starter because he could lead you down positive waters in fantasy points if you're into that kind of thing. I'm not a fantasy guy because I'm too busy with reality to deal with fantasy football and everything else I have going on. There's just no way I can fit that in my schedule. So with that being said, I look at the underperforming route that Baker Mayfield has actually taken, and he made up for it in 2020. Of course, as we know, his stats were that much better. But when you look at the Browns' history, again, we're talking about Bernie Kosar and the fact that his 86 season was extremely just outstanding for Bernie Kosar, especially the way that he played in the then AFC Central, and the fact alone that Baker Mayfield threw more than 3 times as many touchdowns, but the interceptions certainly hurt him, especially. And of course, no interception is untimely. They're all untimely. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what stature, doesn't matter how long you've been in the NFL or how many rings you have. An interception is bad, regardless. And when I look at Baker Mayfield, I think to myself, man, is there any way to send this guy out on a higher note than not being the guy in Cleveland? And I look at this as just being so, so horribly right for him being able to get out of Cleveland. Of course, you can say mistake by the lake, and you can have all these euphemisms you want in regards to Baker Mayfield and how he didn't mesh in the system, and that's all fine and well. And you could have that conversation because that could be very realistic, especially for those Cleveland Browns fans who's been waiting a very long time to get back to any type of promised land. And more importantly, when you look at Baker Mayfield and the fact alone that he had a signing bonus of almost $22 million, certainly begs the question as to whether or not he's going to be able to repeat that performance now that he's in Carolina, because we know that there's nothing guaranteed anymore. He needs to play, 1 year to, possibly have a shot in being the quarterback of the future for maybe the Carolina Panthers or another team in the NFL that does not have a 500 record. Now, when I look at this, I think to myself, okay, well, Baker Mayfield, not really endeared in the locker room, check. Not really a player's coach in regards to, him giving anything back to the rest of the locker room from a positive standpoint. We're always talking about what they do on the field, but it's what they do off of the field. And of course, he has done absolutely nothing wrong off the field. and it hasn't been really a media darling per se. Maybe that could play into the fact that he's just not been that guy. He's found a way to meld himself into whatever situation from Oklahoma in his college days to where he's headed to into Carolina to play for the Panthers, and obviously the Panthers have really not a whole lot to lose. We're going to talk about those numbers here shortly. But it was more about what Baker Mayfield can bring to this Carolina team, who's absolutely played horrible football. I mean, 30th in the NFL in offensive play. When you look at the types of quarterback play, they tried Teddy Bridgewater. They tried their experimental quarterbacks. Hasn't quite worked out to the standard or where they foresee themselves actually playing in a more competitive situation. And that's, football in the sense of having situational playing in regards to quarterbacks and using checkdowns and double pump fakes, being able to get out of the pocket and make things happen on the run has been something that Baker Mayfield has done from time and time again. And I don't know if the Browns really looked at that torn labrum and say, you know what, that really didn't prevent him. Well, it did. Because you can't, there's certain motions, lateral motions you just can't make with a torn labrum. You can't throw across your body if you have a torn labrum. There's just, you're very limited in regards to your motion or direction of where you're throwing the ball. So for him to get out there and perform like he did prior to having a torn labrum just isn't realistic. And of course, the Browns are the Browns for a reason. And by no means do I say that the Browns don't have an idea what they're doing, but there was a lot of conversation swirling around the general managers and coaches saying, why would you even bother taking a chance on Deshaun Watson when he himself has had nothing but issues and problems legally, as well as, he's been off for an entire year. He didn't play for the Houston Texans and one down last season. And there was it was just a huge conundrum for the Texans to whether or not you're going to give, Woods an opportunity to be a starting quarterback this year. Apparently they will. And I think it was the right choice. David Mills. So I like where the Houston Texans are actually trending right now. They need to get away from the older logic, the older mentality, move into the 21st, 22nd century and think progressively. I mean, we see the Raiders today thinking progressively and using them as a great example. They were in the Stone Ages for quite some time. They utilized John Gruden to the fullest extent that they can to find out, there was a lot of emails circling around that he had sent to other coaches and or lots of other different types of people within different NFL organizations, minimizing women's roles in relation to the NFL. Well, out goes the old and in with the new with Sandra Douglas, who's now the president of the Las Vegas Raiders, is certainly, and I commend her completely for being able to not only achieve that status, but the first African-American, the first woman to be named president for any NFL franchise, shows that, you're going to get away from the Al Davis, type of mentality. You're going to get away from, this black hole type of, gameplay. And I don't know if it's been detrimental to the Raiders organization for any, length of time or any amount of time, but I know that this is progressive and moving in the right direction for the Raiders. Now, how that relates to the Houston Texans, they were also involved in some very off-season types of flavorless, connotations, conversations, words that were used for women and, or minorities in general. I just don't, there's no place in the NFL for any of that. And nor is there going to be any place in the NFL for any of that. And if it's allowed in an NFL locker room, if it's allowed in the front offices, if it's allowed by ownership and presidents, they can either sell the team or fire the people that are associated with that horrible and horrific behavior by them, because it reflects negatively on the franchise. And it affects sales. It affects, the types of mentalities inside of the locker room. It just affects the team overall. And not to mention the legal ramifications of what they contend with when they contain that type of mentality, when they consistently disregard other people in lieu of trying to forge their own path, which may not be the right one to take. So with that being said, heading back to Baker Mayfield, now as an organization, the Browns themselves have been in a kind of a stalemate in regards to, waiting for Watson, waiting for the deliverance, which I probably would have thought this week would be the day, maybe tomorrow, perhaps sometime next week, as an independent arbitrator will be a part of the decision-making process as to what happens to Deshaun Watson. Now, Jacoby Brissett, yeah, okay, serviceable. The guy will play probably, I'd say six games max. And if that doesn't quite show up, they're going to put in Josh Dobbs. They don't have a lot of options. And that's what is so frustrating about the Cleveland Browns organization, not only from a fan's perspective, but from an organization perspective, because now they don't have any quality leadership to back that up. Not that they've had tons of quality leadership from the quarterback perspective, but they do not have that moving forward. They're going to have to wait. They're going to have to, maybe draft a quarterback, release Jacoby Brissett, maybe Josh Dobbs. That all remains to be seen. Football hasn't even started yet, but the ebbs and flows of the NFL in regards to draft picks and where these guys land, where they should land, where they could land, has a lot to do with finding the right guy for the right role, to do the right thing, and that's to play the best to their ability, regardless of the position on the field. And when I look at where the wild card game was when it comes to Cleveland beating Pittsburgh, it was their first franchise playoff win in like a quarter century. So that's a long time to wait. Browns fans will have to wait that much longer because there's so many more unforeseen and unforeseeable things that could happen. And there's no way to really kind of pin the tail on the donkey in regards to, well, that's the issue. That's the problem. They're going to have to do some soul searching and maybe some quarterback searching in free agency. We know that Colin Kaepernick is out there. I don't know if he'll even be remotely considered to acquire a starting position in the NFL. Don't know that he's ready to play in the NFL. And lots of other guys, we've seen Ryan Fitzpatrick, who also went into retirement, but you never know. He can come back. He's a serviceable guy and play for the Cleveland Browns. So it's really hard to know what the season holds for the Cleveland Browns. But on the other side of that coin, when you look at Mayfield with a 5th-year option at the end of April for the Browns, still playing there, and of course he had played more than 75% of the Browns' offensive snaps in his first 3 seasons, says a lot about who he is, his gameplay, and how he made the Browns that much better and that much more relevant. Now, not to suggest that the other side of the ball defensively, they weren't able to get anything done, because boy did they. The defense was absolutely stout. They dropped a lot of different types of players right on their hind end and really made a name for themselves defensively last season. But, again, injuries, interceptions by the offense, Baker Mayfield not playing as well as he probably could have, a torn labrum he played with. So there's a lot of questions around that. But when you take a pay cut, and it's a $3.5 million pay cut, certainly says to the organization that's willing to trade for you, so you know what, I'm willing to make a trade just so I can have a fresh start, just so I can go somewhere else and do something with the rest of my football life in whatever capacity, whatever amount of time that actually looks like. This is Rudy Reyes on the Rude Dog Show, Coachella Valley, as well as today's California, today's Canada, as I'm broadcasting live from, so live on YouTube, live on Twitter. This will be on TheRudeDogShow.com. Like it, love it, share it, because, well, I like that kind of thing, and it just helps knowing that people are listening and paying attention out there, and really getting into the minutia of this particular situation. It has to do with Baker Mayfield. And what's really interesting is that when I look at this and I think to myself, man, the bad news could consist of the Panthers not being as good despite some of the upgrades on the other side of the ball. Obviously, now we know Baker Mayfield's trending towards the NFC South. It was more about the offensive line struggles that really hampered the Panthers last year. They did some upgrades. They acquired a Super Bowl champion on that line. I was on yesterday with Dustin Pfeiffer, as well as Mean Gene. We're going to be doing a live show from Las Vegas at the Virgin Hotel and Casino. Hi, Maria. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. Showing the love. Thank you. And it's going good, Facebook user. Whoever you are, I'm not quite sure, but thank you for tuning in. I certainly appreciate that. Any questions, anything at all, feel free to reach out to me, ask questions. I love, chatting on Twitter in regards to the NFL season at Rude Dog Reyes. You can go to TheRudeDogShow.com, find a lot of the quality content I've been able to put out over the last 8 years and counting, I must say. So when we're looking at the Panthers and the types of protection for Carolina is going to have to come off of the paper and really help keep and not only keep Baker Mayfield upright, but prevent the pass rush from coming through in such a way that will allow him to make those completions. Because again, when we look at that 50-year option, he can play into some more money. And I'm sure those incentives are there. They're written in stone, and they're written in his contract that he signed with Carolina. But this can be a very crowded locker room. You have Matt Corral, you have Sam Darnold, now you have Baker Mayfield. Now, I don't know who the elder statesman is here. We know that they have 2 first-round picks in Sam Darnold, who I would have liked to have seen play that much better, not only while with the Jets. Of course, we know what happened there with Matt Nagy and that whole debacle in the offensive line, but more importantly, how he has played since he's been in Carolina. And more importantly, it's about quarterback play, but it's about protection as well. If you don't have the protection up front, you can try to throw the ball 10,000 times, and it's not going to really matter because you don't have the protection up front to make sure that ball leaves your hands and gets to a receiver or tight end in red zone opportunities or even non-red zone opportunities for that matter. But when I look at the Panthers, at first glance, they're going to be better than a 7-10 team, I believe. They're certainly going to have to make this happen a lot sooner than later. And what I really enjoy about this is that now Baker Mayfield's going to have a fresh start. If he's going to be the same old Baker Mayfield, well, that's probably going to end up a lot sooner than later. But it's not going to be a monetary negative for the Panthers. This is more about essentially him trying to find a way out. Again, if for some reason they tank, if that's even a word in the NFL, it could be to some extent. I know it's a no-no in the NBA in regards to tanking. I just don't think it should happen that way. But when you look at tanking, you think of Matt Rule. Now, Matt Rule is on his 3rd year, hasn't done a whole lot with the team, and being the quarterback whisperer, being the offensive guy, the head coach, the guru, I didn't see a whole lot from him, and it's just kind of sad that there's an experiment. I call it an experiment. I call it's the exception, but not the rule. Experiment has to do with Matt Rule. Of course, you probably see what I did there. But I do like the fact that, the Carolina Panthers have their man, or could it be their man, at least at this point. Matt Corral gets to learn from Baker Mayfield, but that just leaves Will Greer to wonder if he's going to stay on the practice squad. Sam Darnold could be the backup. He knows the playbook. He knows the system. And I really foresee Sam Darnold being that backup for him. How that looks as you get towards the middle of the season in the NFC South, when you have, the Falcons, you have the Saints, and you have the Bucs along with the Carolina Panthers. Certainly, could that be more competitive? That remains to be seen. I can't say for certain. I would like to think that the NFC South would be one of the most critically and hard played divisions in football. I just don't know that it will be, at least not at this point. But I think it's more about, Matt Rule becoming progressive when it comes to play action, progressive when it comes to, having the protection up front, which he now has. He has a quarterback under center now. And so I'm really trying to cement Matt Rule as the coach moving forward for the Carolina Panthers. I just have a problem with that. I have a problem with not only the way that he's ran this team up to this point, and I'm not saying he's running them in the ground by any means, but to the extent of what that means to the rest of the NFC South, it's a bigger question as to whether or not he can get past that hump, if he can be that guy to be that head coach. And, I don't think anybody should necessarily be consumed who the Panthers of old are, as they're trying now to turn the corner with Baker Mayfield into more than a 500 team. And of course, process started yesterday with the announcement. And I think he's not only needing to become more acclimated in regards to play calling for Matt Rule, but how that should interpret into who Baker Mayfield is, who he needs to be, which is the student of the game, and build the camaraderie fastly, very, very fast. And by some chance, if Rule isn't the guy to get it done, will the Panthers be that organization that will not only find a way to bring back some of the old school logic with a wash and repeat head coach, otherwise been around the proverbial NFL block a few times? I mean, after all, there have been some mishaps, especially in the NFL, We see that in the NBA in addition to that, to relieve, glory years from a coach who consistently, has had teams that he's led into 500 seasons consistently. That's not what the Panthers need right now. They need a solid core. They did some upgrades in the coaching staff, which certainly will help. Different minds, different attitudes, different coaching perspectives. And Matt Rule needs to be a part of the solution and not part of the problem. You've heard me say on this show quite a few times. But the bigger question is whether or not this head coach experiment is the exception and not the rule. I don't suspect that the Panthers will make a run at the Super Bowl, especially what lies ahead in their schedule, which sees the Cleveland Browns in week 1. So it really makes you wonder, where this is actually going for the Carolina Panthers. But make no mistake, there's going to be some competitive spirit flowing in the NFC South. The Chiefs will be in the driver's seat for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who came up short, heading to another Super Bowl run. Saints have been on the rise, but last year, Jameis Winston, the untimely injury, forced Ian Book into a starting role that he was seemingly prepared for to step into. But you can find that interview. And hi, right back at you, Coachella Valley. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. Thank you for the platform as well. You see Ian Book starting into a role where maybe he was ready, maybe he was not, but you can actually you can check out that interview on the Rude Dog Show on my YouTube channel. And stay home, people. Watch the show. We appreciate it. Thanks for those kind words, Coachella Valley. What I caught up with him in this past Radio Row in the Super Bowl, that was going on in LA. But of course, when you look at the Atlanta Falcons, you believe that Matt Ryan, who was drafted by the Falcons originally, would have never been on the trading block, but they needed new blood, a new guy under center. And to be honest with you, I really think of this as maybe Matt had not found himself in this system. He did take them collectively, but the quarterback starter under center and Matt Ryan took the Falcons where they had never been before, and that was to a Super Bowl. So certainly there's a lot to be said for Matt Ryan now with the Indianapolis Colts and the heir apparent starter now that they had to gut certain components on that offensive line. Look, the NFC South is going to be very competitive this season. It's not like that of the AFC West by any imagination. We're going to see 3 teams at 500 acting as a spoiler, or when others are attempting to throw them off the cliff. Maybe a playoff bid. Who knows? It's way too early to tell when the other team or teams will be acting as spoiler this fall. It remains to be seen who those teams are actually going to be. But rest assured, there's plenty of football to be played. And if there's anyone's guess, I wouldn't know who that is that will be coming out of the NFC North to represent the NFC, if in fact it does come out of the North in the Super Bowl. And based on the numbers, the Browns will relatively have $10.5 million in dead money, which to them, I guess, is not a lot of bread to lose, which leaves $8.35 million in cap space. And of course, Panthers are taking on about a $5 million hit, which again for them is not really a hit. There really isn't a whole lot of dead money associated with that. But again, keep this in mind. Baker Mayfield in 2018, 2019, and 2020, he's played in 14, 16, 16, and 14 games. He's QB percentage is not very high. Completion about 62%. Thrown for 14,125 yards, completed only 61% of those passes, completed 1185, attempted 1924. His interception ratio is 2.9. So, I mean, he's right there. His win-loss record is 30-30, and the games played was 59 at a QBR rate of 87.7. So with all those numbers being said and where he is right now, I really foresee the Carolina Panthers utilizing his services. Hopefully a torn labrum is healed and ready to go, because they're going to need him a lot more as the season goes on, being the heir apparent starter under center. Bigger question is do you give the backup responsibilities to Sam Darnold because he knows they playbook all that well, or do you hand it off to a guy in Matt Corral who was just drafted in the 2022 NFL draft? All that remains to be seen. Again, I like what Carolina did here. They don't lose basically anything in association with getting and acquiring Baker Mayfield. And more importantly, I think that when you look at Baker Mayfield, he could have a relived career. I still believe there's gas in the tank for him. And I think moreover, I like where he's going. I like where he's trending. I really believe that when it comes to everything related to understanding the Panthers playbook and Matt Rule's system, I think it's going to start a lot sooner than later for Baker Mayfield and the Carolina Panthers. Wanted to give my 2 cents on this. This is Rudy Reyes on the Rude Dog Show. Coachella Valley has me on the platform, and thank you, Coachella Valley. I certainly appreciate it. And more importantly, today's California, today's Canada, eh? And of course, stay tuned. I will be with the Sports Kings and Dustin and Gene in Las Vegas at the Virgin Hotel and Casino. I certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you so much. And with that being said, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a great night.